if someone's like really unsure, oh, I don't know what awakening is, and I've had this experience and that experience, and they feel really unsure. Whether or not I tell them they have or haven't, and it's usually more like you probably haven't, and they usually know it. But regardless of that, what I'm actually more inclined to point to in that moment anyway is something in the emotion spectrum or something like doubt. If you're wavering, if you're in your mind, I'm usually more inclined to just point out that, okay, when you feel like that, regardless of whether you've had an awakening or not, when you feel like, is it this or is it that? Torn between two truths, that's not living truth, that's intellectual truth. You're engaging your mind, basically. So in that case, it doesn't really matter, right? Sometimes it feels like a pretty significant experience, but then it's kind of gone in like a day, like completely gone. And that's like more like a pre-taste. You could say experientially it's what awakening is, but the identity hasn't changed. Nothing about the identity has shifted in that case. If they're having an awakening, well, then they don't care at all. They don't feel like they're claiming anything. It's not a badge of anything. It's not an achievement. It's just it's a massive opening and a clarifying of everything. And they don't typically want to be checked out with something. They usually want to sort of share the exuberance of it, and that's it. But it's not like they're asking me what this is. They know what it is. It's self-validating. You know what it is because of the experience of it. And you have no inclination usually to call it anything like awakening, but it's very obvious. So in that case, it's obvious already. There's no reason for me to say this or that about it, other than sometimes I'll give a little bit of practice advice maybe for the short term. But even then I tell them, you don't need this. You know that this is already carrying itself deeper, and it's self-informing in a way, right? So in that case, it doesn't matter. The only case I think it can be helpful is someone who's had one in the past and didn't quite realize it, or they usually when I talk to that person as well, like we go back to that experience, and I've had this happen with people like that was 7 years ago. So they go back to the experience and I really walk them through like, well, what happened? Like, how did it feel? Usually it's actually pretty obvious to them something really did change. Something changed and didn't change back. And they can usually identify it. But they'll go, was that an awakening? And then I'm like, well, how did you feel before and how did you feel after? And often it's reasonably clear after a kind of conversation around that topic and around that moment. So in that case, it can be helpful because it can kind of settle their mind. Sometimes they feel like, I don't know if I should be seeking an awakening, even though I always tell people don't seek an awakening anyway. It's not an event in time. So, but they sort of feel like, I don't know if I've had it, so maybe I should be sort of trying to orient towards self-inquiry, or maybe should I work more in the shadow or emotion spectrum type stuff. So in that case, sometimes it's helpful. But even then, in all these cases, what I often tell people when I first interact with them about this topic is I'll say, I don't really care where you are in the spectrum of awakening. It doesn't really matter to me in this moment because you're empty. Everything and everyone is empty. So to be honest, so I don't really see you as awake or not awake. I don't see you as someone distinct even really. So this is just a conversation appearing now. And in this conversation, I'm only really interested in what's being felt now. What are you feeling? What are you perceiving? How are things moving for you right now? And usually that works really well. That kind of takes people off of the hot seat of having to think in terms of the fact that they've had some shift, or to think in terms of them having not had a shift. It doesn't matter. And before and after awakening, you can go through similar things. You can still have certain emotional fixations that need to be addressed. You can have the mind get bound up with beliefs or confusion or doubt. It can happen. So we're just going to address things directly in the moment. And so in general, it usually doesn't really matter that much, actually.